Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Research Community Manager for Sage Method Space, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Virginia Yonkers, who has contributed to Method Space, and I'm invited to be a part of this conversation because I did this presentation last year for a conference, and it really got me thinking, and I felt it needs more attention because when we're at the early stage of our careers, usually someone is either setting the expectations or the restrictions about what we write, where we get published, how we should go about our professional life in terms of conferences and other kinds of presentations. But we reach a point, either maturity in years or stage of our careers, where no one is telling us what to do. And then we have to think about our own priorities and how we should proceed. So I wanted to have this conversation with Virginia and talk about some of the experiences that we've had and our perceptions and unanswered questions. But I've kind of laid out a few possibilities here to just get our conversation started. So one option is to just try something completely different. Another is to select meaningful projects, perhaps ones you couldn't do at another stage of your life. Mentor, coach, support others, curate your life's work, and take risks. So let's just start with this one about doing something different. So here, thinking about, well, perhaps trying another area, not staying within the discipline that you've focused on, with your career, maybe looking at other kinds of publication opportunities. So Virginia, but what do you think? What have you done that
Well, in my case, my entire career was doing something different. So I always went from place to place to place. But one of the things that I've always tried to do and I continue to do is just because you hit a certain place doesn't mean that you're not able to go in a different direction, learn a new skill, learn something. And this is where I think we're used to, we're the mentors, we will bring people along. And, as you're going through your career, you always have someone who's going to um, help you along the way in finding those new directions that maybe you want to go to. But I think what we forget is those mentors also learn something new. They're also moving in different directions than where they started their career at. And those who don't are the ones that is sort of that stereotype that everyone has of the older professor who's set in their ways and they're the ones who are setting the agenda. So I guess being open to a new agenda, being open to new ways that you can, new areas that you can move into. So an example is actually my office mate was getting his PhD, and he's 69 years old. He went back and is in the process of getting his PhD. He had 2 masters, was going on, decided he had been teaching along the way, had been doing consulting also. And he decided, well, maybe I should just go back and get my PhD. This is really interesting for me. And he's taking his time doing it. So even something like that, getting a second PhD, there's, or in my case, what I've been doing is looking at trying to upscale my research skills and learning new things. So I decided I've been working on Excel. I think we had talked about this. You said you don't particularly like it, but it's really different from when we were younger, and there's a lot of new features in it. And so I'm trying to figure out new ways that I can use Excel and in my data analysis, and maybe even going on to R, which I don't think will be that difficult if because I've been doing statistics and things like that. It's just a new language you have to use. But spending some time figuring out how to do that, looking at look at YouTube videos on it and reading books and trying things out with the data that I have. So,
Right. And
um,
sometimes when we're, at the kind of more high pressure points in our careers where we need to be productive in a certain way, I know that I just, would maybe kind of jump over, like if it requires me to step back and learn some new gigantic thing, well, I just don't have time right now. I'm just going to have to either find a collaborative partner who can bring that to the
mhm,
project, or work around it because I simply don't have time. I mean, in my case, I think that my doing something different, part of it was my starting to work with method space and really exploring the potential for using blogs and more informal writing and open access, completely available types of writing versus my previous writing, which has primarily been in a book format. And I'm
mhm.
still writing books and book chapters. I don't, it's not that I dismiss that type of writing, but, looking at other ways that scholars can learn from one another and exchange ideas. I think another thing that I've done that, has been, I mean, it's very interesting to me, might not be interesting to anybody else, but I've always been, I mean, before I went back to school, I had a craft business. I've always had an artistic side in my life. I've been involved with the National Endowment for the Arts and more local arts organizations and things like that. But for the most part, my academic career has not been involved with that side. But over the last couple of years, I've kind of my kind of more art journaling and that side of my work has started to kind of creep into my scholarly work. And I just wrote a book chapter about the value of art journaling, and really just coming from my own personal perspective of how, this helped you to unwind, it helped you to relax, and it also made me a better observer. So part, I guess, of my doing something different is like weaving in some of the things that in the past I might have thought, well, this is more of a hobby, but seeing, some of the crossover and ways that, it might inform my scholarly work.
And
So let's,
something just related to that very quickly is how how many of us have these notebooks of ideas.
mhm, right,
Uh, now the time, now we have the chance to actually go back
right,
and maybe look at some of those notebooks and be like, what was I thinking then?
right, right,
Although, here's an idea,
right,
I'm not sure exactly what it was, but now I have the time to do this. Maybe I can explore this a little bit more.
which is a good segue to the next possibility of selecting meaningful projects that might not, have the kind of, immediate sort of result that, say if I write a book and it's published and people buy it, well, there's a, kind of a known sequence there. But, perhaps, like you say, going back to some things that were sparked along the way. You were
Mhm.
working on some project and you've got to get that done. You can't be distracted, but you've got, these other things over to the side
No,
kind of raise some questions that now you can say, well, I can explore those questions and look for things that um, that might be, interesting and perhaps make a contribution. And I think, within this also, we mentioned kind of disciplinary parameters before, that, with it may be that there are projects that didn't necessarily fit within your own discipline that kind of crossover, developing new kinds of partnerships that allow you to go into other spheres and use what in a different way.
Or back to the meaningful projects, perhaps it wasn't meaningful within your discipline. So you sort of stayed in your lane because that's what was expected, or that's where you could get money. But now here's something, now you have time where you can really sort of look at something. It's on your own time, maybe on your own dime. I was always an adjunct or a visiting professor, so it was always on my own dime. So it's not, but I know many of my colleagues who were full-time were, they'd say, oh, I wish I could really study this, but really I know there's no money in that. There's no grant money. And really, the school, this is not going to get me anywhere within my profession. Whereas once you're towards the end of your or out, as in my case, I'm a emeritus. So once you have left the academy or your department completely, you don't have to worry as much about if I do this, if I'm spending my time on this, can I get the course that I need to get? Or move into something else. So it may, and also when you're talking about the meaningful projects, I have a very good, one of my co-authors just retired, or she's in the process. She's in the process of retiring. She's got a 5-year window, so she's doing the gradual retirement. And what she's doing with her free time is working out in the community, which is what she really wanted to do. She had been doing some work with that, but now she can spend a lot more time with organizations that she feels her expertise could really help. She's on the boards of a couple of organizations. She's consulting with some other organizations, and these are projects that for her are really important, that she got a lot of she didn't have a lot of time to do this previously, and she got even a little bit of pushback on, well, you need to publish in the area where you're hired for. So this was not necessarily within her discipline, but it was something that she felt really she had an expertise in, and she could actually contribute to that community.
Right. So we have many discussions about research impact. And, our theme for 2022 on Method Space has been research relevance. What difference does it make, whatever it is you're doing? Is it just you taken a different angle on something somebody else has taken, and so what? Or, is it something that will actually help to address some of the critically difficult problems that we face in our society across the world at this time? But maybe when we're busy trying to teach and write and do all of the things that are required as an active academic, I mean, how much time can you really spend to, in some cases, translate what you've done into something that is applicable? How would you use this? I've learned all this stuff. How would you use it? Where would you use it? What would be the stages? What kind of preparation would someone need to be able to put this into practice, etc.? That now you can say, like, well, gee, in my career, for example, I've spent a lot of time around issues of collaboration, teamwork, leadership in those settings. But how much time could I really spend, say, working with people who are trying to deal with, difficult problems and negotiate across distances and time zones and all of that, to practically say, well, gee, here are some things that might help you so that you're not, just frustrated all of the time, or the thing just falls apart because you can't get on the same page, you know, but now, I can be thinking about some of those things. And in my case, trying to write, much more practically oriented work for method space where, again, people can access it's freely accessible. And, whether it's by other, people in an academic field or a professional field. So, we have a lot more flexibility.
Or it may even be just a very small niche that you're addressing. But that small group could really, the impact on them would be great. But the overall impact to society may not be. But for that smaller group, you're really able to work with them and spend time with them and really get to know, rather than, oh, I've got to go on to my next one. I finished this project. Now I'll go on to the next. Now you can see a project through from the very beginning all the way to the end. And even in the impact, and okay, now let's go, now that this project is done, what can we do next? What's the next part of that? And granted, you're supposed to be doing this anyway, but sometimes what we have is a project, it's funded, it's done,
Right.
and now it's up to you. But if if you have another project coming up, then you have to walk away from that.
Right.
Now you can continue on and really see, okay, what's the next step that we need to take? Yes, we completed this small project, but what else can we do? Where else can we take this?
Right. I think about how, when we begin working as academics and as academic writers, part of the steps that we need to take is to learn how to speak in the kind of academic language, referencing our sources properly and framing things and setting them up. There's a certain kind of progression of, that either a dissertation or a thesis or a journal article takes in terms of how things are written. Well, but that's not necessarily the way that, say, for someone who is in a more practitioner level, would understand things, where you want to be more straightforward. Here's the problem, option A, option B, option C. Why would this work? Why not? How, so it's almost like we now have to learn, how to translate the other direction. And, in thinking through, the ideas that we're discussing and thinking, well, there are opportunities here to partner with people who are at that more, academic, kind of career, height of their career stage, people who are actively conducting research, people who are, do really care about what they're studying, even if they don't have the time to kind of take it through to the more applied stage. That, as people who are more mature in our work, we can bring something to the table. And that's where I think in your situation, where your university has that a network for emeritus professors, you have that opportunity to connect with others and be able to, engage and perhaps contribute in a different way than somebody who's, deeply in the midst of a lot of other responsibilities.
So at our university, we have an emeritus center. And I looked in a little bit more about sort of the founding of this. And it's been around for about 10 or 15 years. And the purpose of it was for emeritus, not just to sort of fade away, oh, you're done, you're out of here, but to continue to have sort of a perspective that they could help as you have the new generation coming up, they can access you, you can access them, but that emeritus actually had something that they could offer. But one
Mhm.
of the other things that's very interesting is that they have regular talks where they have emeritus present what they're doing. They have emeritus who can apply for grants and work with some of the junior faculty or undergraduate
Mhm.
students or graduate students. Um, and then they present it at the center, or they'll have people come in that are maybe some ideas of new research, new directions for research, for example. So it doesn't put the retired faculty out to pasture, but rather allows them still to be there as resources for the rest of the university, that people can contact them, they can work with younger faculty, they can work with students in areas that maybe students are very interested in. So back to where you were talking about
Mhm.
picking their projects, maybe a student comes in and says, I'm really interested in this, but I can't find any faculty member who can do it.
Right.
Well, there's emeritus who is there, who's a resource that they can use and perhaps work with that student then. So it's just one extra, so it's a win-win situation to have something
Right.
like that.
So even if you are not at an institution that, or not retired or departed from an institution that has a formal program like Virginia just described, many institutions do have some way of connecting interested, successful professionals or academics with students who want a mentoring relationship. So, that's certainly an option that people can try. I mean, I feel like I've had really positive experiences on both sides of the spectrum. A year or so ago, I interviewed someone for a method space um, focus where we were talking about archival research and using document types of research. And I asked around to find someone who was a librarian who focused on this kind of area and was introduced to a woman. And it turned out that she was the head of the entire area of archives and that entire side of the Cornell University Library at the very same time that I was a student, in that library digging through those archives. And so, it was so cool, to hear, her experience and to get the kind of the historical or kind of evolutionary perspective of how this field has changed and what has changed, what hasn't, where some of the tensions and difficulties still are, around accessing that sort of thing. And I was so happy that, this woman who was well retired was still willing to be a part of an interview like that. So I guess, in terms of, to our viewers who are watching this and thinking about their own options, it's not only a matter of thinking about what you can offer to others, in supporting them, but who might you turn to get some insights into some of the things that you're working on? And, thinking about, in some ways, the kind of gift that you give each other. To me, this is a really important part of academic life. And it's something that with the method space, I feel very happy about that, we are able to give visibility to the work of people kind of across the spectrum, from the doctoral student who's doing the first research project but has got something really important to share, to someone who is, at the very end of, the really post career, and but has some experiences that, that we can learn from. So it kind of creates that ongoing informal learning network. And, so this is, I think, a point in our career where we can really, be a part of that on either
And
side.
this reminds me also, as throughout my career, um, as a graduate student, getting my PhD, then as a lecturer, I was part of a research group within our department that had as graduate students all the way up to the emeritus faculty who would come in, and we met once a week. And it was very organic, in which we talked about, people would present what they were working on. In some cases, you had PhD students who were still trying to decide on things, on what they wanted to, what their dissertation was going to be about. And what was great was when you had the older faculty, the emeritus faculty who were there, they would say things like, well, I remember, about 20 years ago, so-and-so worked on that, on their dissertation. And in fact, I think they did a very similar dissertation. So you might want to look in the archives and see if they have those.
Mm-hmm.
Or they would talk about them and say, there was a lot of research on this 20 years ago, and that idea sort of fell out of favor. And I'm not sure why, because there was a lot of really good research. And so a lot of times when you're younger and you're into, you're new in your career and you're like, oh, I have a great idea. No one ever thought of this. It's totally new and original. And in a way, it's the worst part when you're a graduate student, is just then find out that no, there were people that did that in the past, on the one hand. But on the other hand, what is nice is they've set some of the groundwork.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was nice to have someone who had that institutional background,
Right.
that institutional memory, that they could say, hey, how about looking here? What you're saying is a little bit different, but they have a lot of research back there. And so having that, as you say, that the back and forth between both, I would say the academic generations, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
I think it helps both groups.
Right. Right. So this kind of taking, a sort of a different angle in terms of options, and, this sort of calling, curating your life's work. So, as a academic writer, we've done, all kinds of things. Some things maybe they're out of print, or it was in paper, but it didn't get digitized, or, maybe you've just got a lot of stuff, that, uh, may or may not have, current relevance. But, what did you learn from that? And what value would there be in, pulling what you learned together, pulling those pieces together, into some kind of form, depending on what the nature of your work. It could be that, you create a website or a blog where you can make, those earlier works available and include some commentary that talks about the evolution of the work. It could be that it's something that you do, really just for yourself, that, there's not an audience that, wants this. Who knows? I mean, it could be that your institution would like to put this in the library, or it could be that it's just something that you do, for your own kind of, um, sense of accomplishment.
Or
So,
even updating things. You know, with textbooks and books, a lot of times you'll have updated versions, a second edition, a first edition, a
mhm,
second edition, third, fourth. But how many times do we have updated versions of our journal articles, for example? So taking something that maybe you wrote 10 or 15 years ago, which some of, an example of this is Tuckman, who my specialty is groups. And he had started off with group, it was the first person who had the stages of group development. And about 20 years after his initial journal article, he came out with a co-author, someone who was younger, a new faculty member. I can't remember if it was a faculty member or a grad assistant. And he took all of, looked at a lot of the research that was based on his original article.
Mhm.
Then he updated his model,
Right.
added some things, and gave more, identified where maybe the theory had taken off in a different direction than what he had intended.
Mhm.
And so why he felt that that was something that was not part of his theory, and really addressed that, it was sort of looking at all of that literature, and this was what my intention was. And 20 years later, that is as an important article as his
Mhm.
original one.
Right. Or, placing your work within the context of social, cultural, economic, political factors.
Changes.
What was going on at the time that you did this? Why did you choose to go in this direction? And how did your ideas change over time? How did you, gain new understandings and that sort of thing? It's, could be that it's in the form of almost like a memoir, or it could be that it's a compilation of pieces that, with commentary, whatever form it might take. I think, taking the time to celebrate what you have done and tie it together would be, potentially very useful to others. Or again, it could just be something that you can say, well, okay, here's what I've done, and I feel good about that.
Right. Right.
And so the final one that I wanted to talk about is about taking risks and speaking out. And I think this is something, a particular relevance right now, where we have a lot of attacks on higher education and on scholarship and publication, and just we're both in the US, but I know that these are issues present around the world. And so for someone who is at the stage where they're trying to get tenure, they're trying to progress in their careers, perhaps have many other earlier in the family development stage in a personal life, that they just cannot take the risk to speak out. But for those of us who are at a different point in our careers, where we have either because again, because of maturity in age or maturity in career success, we have the credibility. If we speak out about something that we've spent a whole career working on, we've got some more credibility than somebody who is just starting out and maybe is just talking from their own personal limited experience. We've got some credibility. We've got our name in our field. We've got a reputation in our field. So, we've got a platform from which we can speak. And then on the other side, that, while certainly I don't dismiss the possibility of actual physical threats and risk in this era, we have kind of, there's a point at which it's like, well, I'm not personally, in a position where, if I speak out, I can say more provocative things than someone, as I say, who is at a different point in their career. These are things that need to be said. We need to be voiced. We need to give voices to people who have not been heard before, and all of those, kinds of issues that, can be a little bit more edgy than we could have been. And to me, this is a real sense of social responsibility for people who are at this career stage.
And also to advocate for those that you see are in a vulnerable position.
Right.
Advocate for knowing that within the institution, some people have access to change makers, where others don't. They're silent, they're invisible. So making them, and I don't want to say making them more visible, because their invisibility does, on the one hand, it makes it safer for them sometimes.
Right.
So if there aren't any safeguards, us pointing out, well, these people, this is what's happening
Right.
to them, then makes them visible, then makes them a target.
Right. Right.
So for us to speak out as a change maker for changes within the institution, so that those people who are invisible feel comfortable being visible, being able to speak. And that's the part where it's there's that tightrope. It's very important,
Right.
if you're taking those risks, that you're taking them for on yourself, but not at putting someone else at risk.
Right. Right. Very important point, especially today when, we are seeing, people in fields that in the past we thought were fairly innocuous kinds of fields, like librarians and nurses, who are finding themselves, at the receiving end of either physical or verbal threats. So, we don't want to be so overzealous that we create a situation that's harder for others, but just observing, the problems in society as they relate to our fields, the work that we've done, and being able to speak up and take risks. I think is something that is important, to look for. Where is that needed? Where could your voice help?
Right. Create spaces for dialogue that are safe, that perhaps now is much more, it's not safe for everyone. So creating a way in which you can talk about the issues without putting words in people's mouths.
Right.
That's always the difficult part, is
Right.
knowing how to do that.
Right. Well, I hope that for those of you who have watched this video, that we've given you some food for thought about what you can or should or would like to do. And certainly, and I completely understand that, there are people who reach a certain point and they just go like, I'm done. I'm just going to sign off. Like, I don't call, don't write. Like, I'm not, I want nothing more to do with this. I'm done. I've given, it's over. But I think there are many of us who, reach a point where we feel that, we've spent a lot of time developing knowledge and expertise, going through all sorts of tumult and coming out of it, and feel that we have, something more to offer. And so I hope that this will give you some ideas about, perhaps opportunities you could look for that would allow you to continue making contribution.
And the thing is, even if you, and I've seen this very many times, where initially someone says, well, we're out of here. And that first year, you're like, woohoo, I'm out of here. And then about the second year, you're like, oh, I really miss this aspect. And to know that there's still ways that you can keep up with that
Mhm.
and still still be an academic, even though you may not be in the academy anymore.
Right, right. Well, thank you, Virginia, for taking time to chat with me about this. And I hope that we'll hear from some of our viewers and maybe they'll have some additional options to suggest.